Good day. My name is Michael Mulondo, and I'm going to present on the subject Psychological Counseling 2 for the higher certificate. And the purpose of this presentation is to give guidelines to the assignment for the subjects. And there are 4 assignments that you are expected to complete as a student. So we're quickly going to go through the 4 assignments just to guide you through, and then we will discuss it during when we're going to look through each assignment. The first one is asking the issue of religion and counseling. Now, there is a statement which says that most professionals highly regard the relationship between religion and counseling, whereby daily life issues and religion brings out different dimensions required to serve people comprehensively. So the question is then, you are expected then to discuss the statement where you look at is there any relation with religion, spirituality, and counseling? And if there is any relation between these 2 or 3, what are those relations? And then you have to mention the reasons why you say there is any relation. And if there is no relation, then you have to discuss this. And of course, it will be expected for me to give some practical example when you're going to discuss these 2 components. And also then to look at different dimensions. How does spirituality or religion, when you are going to do counseling, how can counseling use, or what role does religion and spirituality play when it comes to counseling, and especially for people that are affected with HIV/AIDS? So that's with regard to the first assignment, and of course you will be expected to do some practical example and to give some practical example. The second assignment is looking at adolescence, and what is looking at it. It looks at what are the dynamics or the challenges that adolescents are actually experiencing. And this is now where when we talk about adolescence, it's a transition between the childhood and adulthood. What are the physical, what are the mental development, and what development and growth does adolescents go through? And the reason is you have to explain is what challenges adolescents are facing with regard to this growth and this development. And it will also be expected for me to give some factual some facts, scientific facts also to explain. And as you're going to explain the different areas of development of adolescents or young people, then you have to give some practical examples. And of course, you have to refer to facts. And it's the reason why this is very important, because you will later see that when you are going to deal with counseling and counseling adolescents or young people, you have to understand what young people are actually going through or what adolescents are going through. And it's very important that in your counseling session, while you're counseling adolescents, you have to know what challenges they are experiencing, whether it's mentally, whether it's physically, and it's very important for them. So assignment 3, or the third assignment, is it will be required from you to discuss why people do not have access to HIV counseling and testing services. You have to talk about what is HIV counseling, what is testing, and how does the government of Namibia address this issue of HIV counseling, and why do people, if there are people who do not have yet access to these services. And you might also during this assignment give some comparative where you will compare the services from other countries like in Botswana, South Africa, and maybe also Zambia, and then just compare the HIV counseling and testing services that's been given to people, and then you can address and look at the best practices, what are the challenges, and so on. The fourth assignment is you are going to look at sex and sexuality. There are different cultures in Africa, and each culture are having their own sexual beliefs and also their sexual practices. So in this assignment, you will be expected to discuss and look at the different sexual practices and beliefs within the African context. This will also be very good if you can compare the practices from other countries compared to Namibia. Now, you will first look at Africa as a whole, looking at the different practices, the different beliefs when it comes to the sexuality. And then you will zoom into Namibia, looking at the different cultures within Namibia. Is what kind of beliefs do they have, and what factors influence people or different cultures to have certain beliefs and practice when it comes to sexuality. And in your assignment, you have to give some facts, and you have to give some resources that can state that there are some cultures in Africa and also in Namibia that do believe in certain practices, and that do believe who have certain belief, and based on their belief, this is what they're actually practicing. So these are actually the four assignments. So we will go through these four assignments and we will discuss them in detail. Now, the first assignment is going to look at religion, spirituality in counseling. Why does religion or spirituality play a very important role when it comes to counseling? Now, especially in Namibia is having at least 95% that profess to be Christians, or that profess to believe in spirituality, to believe in God. So when you are a counselor and you find yourself in a situation where you have to give counseling, and if religion or spirituality is being raised, what role does it play, and what is expected from you as a counselor? Now, in your assignment, you have to discuss in detail, you have to explain first, what is religion? What is spirituality? Then secondly, you have to explain in your assignment what role or what linkages is there between religion, spirituality, and counseling. And then thirdly is how can you use religion and counseling in your counseling session? And then fourthly, you may come up with best practices looking at these two, religion, spirituality, and counseling, and what role they play when it comes to counseling session. And it's very important that, especially when it comes to religion and spirituality, as a counselor, you have to be very sensitive, you have to be very cautious, you have to be very professional. And in your assignment, it will be very good if you can discuss the level of professionalism when it comes to religion, spirituality, and counseling. Now, when we look at religion, and this is just a very small definition, and of course you have to explain and teach it. Religion is a formal institution. There are so many religions in this world, and specifically when we look in Namibia, and most people or individuals, they considered religion as their formal institutional beliefs. Now, how are you going to use or look at religion, for an example? You've got so many diverse beliefs and religion. So as a counselor, you have to be very cautious when it comes to the institutional or formal institutional structure of religion. Doesn't matter which one, because there are certain beliefs that these religions are actually exercising, and for you as a counselor, you have to look at this. Now, as a student for this assignment, you might give some example. So you might take a specific religion and give some examples. For an example, in Namibia, we've got Christianity. You might use Christianity. You have Muslims. You might use Muslim, and then you bring out the facts. Is can you use this formal institutional structures in your counseling session? And if, how are you going to use that? And because for an individual or a counselee that coming to your counseling session, they found for them their religion is very sacred. and they believe in certain things which are very valuable to them. So it's very important that in your assignment you have to discuss these dynamics, these challenges, looking at the different factors, the multidimensional areas and levels of religion. So you have to discuss this. Then secondly, spirituality. Now spirituality it's focusing more on what people call personal meaning, personal fulfillment. Now if you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy, the pyramid, he talks about the basic needs of a human being, and then at the top of his pyramid, then he called what he called self-actualization. Now, self-actualization means actually you have come to your own realization of who you are. And it talks about contentment. It talks about that place where you find that inner peace within yourself. Now, spirituality has got different interpretation for different people. Now, in your assignment, it will be expected from you to explain all this different dimension of spirituality, what it means for a person, and how that actually makes a person, and for many individuals that spirituality is a pathway to transcend into a higher level of self-consciousness. And when you reach that self-consciousness, it brings you to a place of transcendence, peace, and that's why you've got meditation and so many other ways and technique that people are experiencing or exercising when it comes to spirituality. So in your assignment, you can bring up all those characteristics of spirituality and then discuss it in the context of counseling. Now, for some people, they might use religion and spirituality and intertwine them, as a combination. Some people will separate it, but this is what you have to discuss in your assignment. Is when people are combining religion and spirituality, how can you as a counselor apply that approach? And if they separate it, it's also your prerogative then also to explain it. Now, religion and spirituality does play a very important role in counseling, and there are so many counselors when it comes to religion and spirituality that they've got different views, and it's very important also in your assignment that you have to discuss now from the point of view as a counselor, because a counselor can also use his own religion and his own spirituality in his own counseling session. Now, there are different factors that can influence a counselor when it comes to religion and spirituality. The first factor is the counselor's personal beliefs. Now, as a counselor, when you have certain beliefs, whether it's your religion or spirituality, it's very important, that you have to be cognizant, to be sensitive, and not to force or to reinforce your own beliefs. So in your assignment, you have to discuss the personal beliefs of a counselor. Secondly is the openness of the counselor. How open is the counselor to the client? If a client is having a different perspective of religion and spirituality to that of the counselor, so you as a counselor, you have to be very, very much vigilant and then also very open and accommodative when it comes to the beliefs of your client. And you find yourself that in many times that when your client is opening up him or herself in that counseling session, that the client will actually, bring out his own strong beliefs when it comes to religion and spirituality. So you as a counselor, as much as possible that you even disagree with a client, you have to be open as much as possible. The third thing is the directiveness. Is you as a counselor, how directive are you, and the non-directive style that you have to actually use. So it's very important for you as a counselor that when you look at these things that you have to discuss it in detail. So counselor, you also need to be very sensitive, and then you have to look at the ethical dynamics of your beliefs as a counselor. Now, the second assignment is looking at the whole issue of the adolescence, and this is a transition from childhood to adulthood, the in between. Now, there are different stages that you are going through, and I quickly want to go through that stages, and it will be expected from you in your assignment to discuss those different stages, for an example. Now, from infancy to late adulthood, there are certain developments or certain stages that you are going through, and for each stage that you are going through, you are experiencing a mental, a psychological, and a physical change. And it's very important that in your assignment, when you are going to address this assignment, that you have to give first some factual experience, some factual information on the different stages from adulthood, from childhood to adulthood. And this is just in a guide, what we are going to share with you now. The first one is the infancy stage, and then you've got the early childhood stage, then you've got the late childhood stage, you've got the adolescent stage, and then you've got the early adulthood stage, and the middle adulthood stage, and then also the late adulthood stage. Now, I will expect, or it is expected from you in your assignment, that for each stage you have to discuss the mental development. You have to discuss the physical development. And then also, it will also, so when you discuss the physical, then you say, for an example, you take at early childhood, you first discuss is what development is going through physically. Then you have to discuss what development is it going through mentally. So you have to discuss this in detail. So it is expected from you in your assignment to discuss this and then to give some practical example, especially when it comes to these different stages. And then thirdly, which is very important, is you have to discuss is what role does counseling play in these different stages. Should you counsel people in these different stages of their life? What kind of style can you use? How or what role does counseling play in this different stage of human being? So the other thing is also what you can also, when it comes to the physical stage is or stages, you might also discuss the body growth, what is going throughout with the body, what changes are being experienced. So you might give some details, and make sure that when you give those details, it needs to be factual, and you have to give some practical examples. When it comes to mental, it talks about the mind. So you have to talk is what development does the mind go through, and during the stage you might also use some psychological theories to discuss the mental development or the mind development as part of the factual sources that you're going to use. So it's very important that you have to take you have to discuss this in detail during. The other issue is also emotional. There are emotional changes that a person goes through from childhood up to adulthood. So what are those changes that you are going through, those emotional changes? You can discuss the feelings, the fear, the joy. So those different changes are very important, and in your assignment it is expected that you have to discuss this in detail and bring out those changes. The other aspect of changes that you can, or stages that you can also discuss in your assignment, is the social. And the social stages are looking at the interactions, the relationship, when it comes to the different levels or stages that you are going through. What relationships are you having for each stage? What kind of interaction is there? And this is what you have to discuss. For an example, as a child, you have a relationship with your parents, but when you reach adulthood change, which means that you will have your own children, which means you become a parent and you will have a relationship with your own children. So this is what you have to discuss in this assignment. So we're going to go to the third assignment, where we're going to look at HIV counseling and testing. And as I said earlier when I gave my introduction, that it's very important that you have to look in detail. Now, HIV counseling in Namibia has gone through different stages, different changes, and also different challenges. Now, in your discussion or in your assignment for the study, you have to discuss the origin of the HIV counseling testing in Namibia. You have to discuss how it evolved, what changes it went through. You have to discuss it from the 90s up to where we are in 2017 and so on. You have to discuss what are the challenges that actually HIV counseling and testing went through in Namibia, and if those challenges has been addressed and how these challenges has been addressed. So it's very important that in your discussion and in your assignment you have to bring out this discussion, you have to discuss it in detail. So there are four bullet points or 4 points that are thoughts that I want to share with you when it comes specifically to HIV counseling and testing and your assignment. The first thing that you have to look through, you have to look at people that are HIV positive. Do people that are HIV positive, number one, know their status? And number two, when they know their status, do they access these services? And if they access these services, how do they access these services? And it's very important that you have to look at a two-way stream. Number one is, how do the population or the community identify the existing of these services? The other way stream is you have to look at is in your services, how do you identify people that are HIV positive in the community? And the services that are being given to these people, is it comprehensive services? So if you are taking people through the what we call the pre-test and the post-test counseling, despite their status, what is the outcome of the pre-test and post-test counseling, and is it working? And then secondly, you have to discuss the referral system, which is actually linked to the services of pre and post-test counseling. If somebody is HIV positive, how are you going to refer them, for example? So you have to look at the referral system, you have to look at the referral. So it's very important. So first, look at the issues of HIV positive people. The second thing that you have to look at is you have to look at the package that's being given. Number one is you first look at the entry point, and then number two is you are looking at the comprehensiveness, and then number three is you need to look at the attractiveness of this package. So if people come into a service or into a clinic, for example, is what is the service? How is the entry point? How is the accessibility to those services? We might look at the issues of language barrier. You have to look at other challenges. So it's very important in your assignment you have to discuss this in detail. The third aspect you have to look for this assignment is you have to look at behaviors. How are you going to use your counseling session, whether it's post-test, whether it's pre-test counseling or post-test, how are you going to bring out the issue of behavior, risky behavior to your client? Talking about how they can identify risky behavior, how they can reduce those risky behavior, whether it's despite or irrespective of their status. So this is very important that you have to discuss that when it comes to HIV counseling and testing. And those in your assignment, you have to give some examples, but how you are going to do it, and give some factual information as much as possible. Then the fourth aspect that you have to look in under HIV counseling and testing is the whole issue of young people. The issue of adolescent-friendly services, of young people-friendly services. How friendly is the services when it comes to counseling and HIV testing? I'm talking about youth-friendly services, and also bring out those challenges and those issues within the context of Namibia. is the issue of youth friendliness being addressed, and how is it being addressed when it comes to HIV counseling and HIV testing. So it's very important that in your assignment you have to bring out those aspects. Now there is a diagram that I'm going to give, and it's just for your information. And as you can see there, you've got the VCT, which is the Volunteer Counseling Testing Centers, and as you can see there are different arrows that shows different ways. So the volunteer counseling testing centers play a very vital role in any community, and in your assignment you also can bring out the roles of VCTs and how effective are they, what are their challenges, and so on. So you have to discuss this in detail. Then the last assignment, assignment 4, is you're going to cover the whole issue of sexual belief. Remember in my introduction I talk about cultural beliefs and cultural practices. Now you are going to look at sexual beliefs and practices and how that is being practiced within the different culture. Now in my presentation I'm going to give you an example of 3 types of culture, and I'm using the dynamics of religion. For example, you've got Judaism, you've got Christianity, and you've got Islam, which is one of the 3 main religions in the world. So how are you going to look at this different religion, and what are their beliefs? For example, a culture or an ethnic group or whoever, they've got certain beliefs, and those beliefs are based on their religion. And because of their belief and their religion, this is how they practice their sexuality. So what do they believe? For example, I give you in Judaism, they believe that sex is a way to reproduce. God wants to have both men and women, to have children. The Christians also have the same belief like the Judaism, where they believe that husband and wife is a way of procreating, and sex is there to procreate. If you look at the Islam, almost the same, that sex is also occurring between married people. So in your assignment, you have to look out those things. And then you have certain beliefs and certain area. And I just want to bring out a certain thoughts to your mind that you can also discuss in your assignment. Number 1, the whole issue of fornication. How do people see, for example, when it comes to fornication, adultery, for example, the issue of prostitution. Bring out the issue of premarital sex, that means sex before marriage, extramarital sex, which means sex after marriage. So these are the issues that you can bring out, where you look at the different challenges that different cultures are experiencing, and what are their views with regard to those challenges or those problems, and do they see it as a taboo? Do they see it as a belief? And how do they practice this? For example, you've got some cultures that believe that a man can be married with more than one wife, which means we talk about polygamy. Then you've got other cultural belief that men must only be married to one spouse. So and in your assignment, you bring out this comparative, compare the 2 different cultures, the one that believe in polygamy, the other one that believe in monogamy, and bring out this dynamics, which is very important for you. So the list goes on. You can talk about the issue of homosexuality, procreation, incest, polygamy, as I've said, gender issues, sex, contraceptive. So in your assignment, bring out these dynamics when it comes to sex and sexuality, and what people believe and what culture believe on. So this is now my 4th assignment, and I hope that you have learned something through this. And I wish you all the best when you're going to prepare and then deliver this assignment on time. I thank you.